Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. This is Filippo Veglio with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD. Delighted to welcome you to this session on Vision 2050. As you see here, the header, Realizing System Transformation, Business Insights into the vision of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, work that is ongoing to refresh it, and excited today to share some insights into how that refresh is going and the overall outlook for that work. And delighted to share perspectives not only from the project team leading the work on behalf of the Secretariat, but also in particular a dedicated in-depth session with member company perspectives in terms of the value they're drawing from it, the insights they are sharing with us today about this piece of strategic insight for the Council members themselves. The host today, delighted to be today, co-hosts alongside my colleagues James Gom and Julian Hill Landolt, who are both the directors leading this piece of work. We'll be talking through a number of different chunks of the agenda, and delighted to walk you through the next 85 or so minutes alongside our members on this particular session. Given that today is also a public facing session, very shortly an introduction into the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD, always a difficult acronym, but basically a coalition of 200 companies united by a shared belief in the linkages between sustainability and business success, united by a joint mission of making more sustainable companies more successful, and very much a mission underpinned by the idea of business leadership to shape a world that by mid-century can accommodate over 9 billion people living well within the boundaries of the planet by 2050, as I mentioned. A warm welcome in particular today to the representatives of our member companies. Here you see the logo, the slides with logos of all of our members. Overall, if you take country headquarters, about 40 countries and industry sectors, 20 of them. A warm welcome to all of you who represent WBCSD member companies, and a warm welcome also to partner organizations of WBCSD, in particular global network partners, and of course all of our institutional partners that support, that guide, and that feed into the work of WBCSD. We've got a great lineup today in terms of speakers to really give you the sort of business insights and member insights into this piece of work on Vision 2050. Delighted to welcome the Chief Executive Officer of ERM, Karen James, for an executive perspective in a few minutes time. And we'll have an exciting panel moderated by Emma Cox, the Head of Purpose and UK Leader for Sustainability and Climate Change at PricewaterhouseCoopers, who will moderate a panel with representatives, as you can see here, from Shell, from Syngenta and Unilever. Warm welcome, of course, to Karen Wesley, to Marina Prada, and to Jonathan Gill, who have kindly agreed to share their insights in this particular process and the benefits and the insights they're drawing back for their own company. So looking forward to these member insights. And allow me only, as every time we do these sessions, these public sessions, to just lay out in two very short slides let's say the household rules that we have in the council with regard to the session, housekeeping, not household. First of all, the session is recorded for the benefit of sharing it more widely, also for those who couldn't attend. Likewise, the slides alongside the recording are made available. We'll have two sessions today, one at 10 a.m. Central European time today, and one at 4 p.m. a little bit later today, and sharing all of this information. Participants are muted for the benefit. I think we have all become experts at online meetings for the benefit of sound and clarity. But please, we encourage you to use the chat function in order to raise any questions or provide any comments you may have on what you are hearing in the next hour and a half. And of course, raise your hand if there's something that you would like to, in particular, convey orally. So very sort of a straightforward household rules in that regard. And an important reminder, lastly, around the antitrust. WBCSD, in line with the governance laid out by the Executive Committee, we please ask you to refrain from engaging in any discussion or any conversation around competitively sensitive issues, such as the one such as the ones that are outlined here around pricing and costs, around bid strategies, around customers, about capacity additions or reductions in the future, and of course also around decisions on output. So we kindly ask you to adhere to this governance rules so that the meeting can run smoothly and without any inconvenience for anyone engaged in it. Very briefly as well, the agenda for today, we have divided into 4 chunks. We'll have my colleague James Gom, director, one of the 2 directors along Julian Hill Landau of the Vision project, providing you with a top-line overview of what the ambition is and the work so far, what it has produced. We'll then have Karen James sharing a few minutes of her perspectives, her personal perspectives, in particular with a focus on their resilience agenda. As I mentioned before, we'll then move into the panel discussion with our 3 panelists and 1 moderator. And of course, all along the way, we'll be opening the chat, and the chat is open for questions and comments that we'll hopefully integrate also throughout the panel, but also in the end, of course, any chance to raise questions, we'll use it. So with that said, I would like to hand over now to my colleague, James Gom, seconded to us from Mitsubishi Corporation and ably leading the work around Vision 2050. James, you have prepared a few slides to walk us through the what and the how to tee up then the panel discussion. Over to you, James.
Thank you, Filippo. Good morning, everybody. Pleasure to have the chance to chat to you today. So just a quick caveat, I'm going through about 14 months of work in about 10 minutes. So lots to get through, but hopefully this gives you a bit of a flavor of the sorts of discussions we've been having on this Vision 2050 project led by our participating member companies. So just a bit of a recap on what the original Vision 2050 was. So launched in 2010, WBCSD brought together 30 of its member companies to create the original Vision 2050, which was a key strategic document for the organization. And it basically imagined what a sustainable world would look like in 2050. How business could play a role in realizing that world and what needed to happen in order for that world to be a reality, and provided business with 3 main value areas, a vision that it could align around, 9 action pathways. As you can see, possibly the most enduring image from that original piece of work with these pathways on the diagram you see on the right-hand side of the slide there. And crucially, a platform for dialogue around all of these issues. Stimulating conversations all around the world, pretty much every sector represented in the organization. So this was an important piece of work for WBCSD. And the top line vision of that work was 9+ billion people living well within planetary boundaries. So these are the 2 key elements that we wanted to realize by 2050, very much in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, and really offering a vision of where we should be by 2050. So why did we take the decision to revisit this work? Well, the conversation started on this more than a year ago now, back towards the end of 2018, and we wanted to start tackling at that point a number of challenges. So one of the key things that we were aware of, especially coming out of conversations at the United Nations level with colleagues there around things like the HLPF and the SDG Business Forum, was that the SDGs themselves, for policymakers, for businesses, for NGOs, for a whole range of stakeholders, were a great guiding North Star, if you like, but different sets of stakeholders were struggling to make the SDGs directly actionable for the crucial decade ahead from 2020 to 2030. And we thought Vision 2050 would be a great vehicle to really bring the SDGs to life for the business community again. Not replacing the SDGs by any means, the SDGs are there for everybody, but really drilling down into what it is that business has to do over the next decade and beyond in order to realize that vision of 9+ billion people living well within planetary boundaries. We also thought we had an important opportunity to paint a positive picture of an achievable future that business could see themselves in and work towards, taking away some of the doom and gloom that usually accompanies any conversations around sustainability, and really galvanize the business community around a positive vision of the future that we could work towards. And finally, the work's taken on new relevance in recent months with the COVID-19 pandemic. And as that's accelerated, the need for a clear view on the systemic transformations that need to happen in order to make sure that we're recovering and responding to the pandemic in a way that has positive consequences for people and planet moving forward. So some really important issues to deal with, and a great opportunity to do so as part of this Vision 2050 refresh. Now, in order to do the refresh, we have a series of different focus areas that we've started on over the past 18 months, I guess, since we started looking at the project. One of those key areas was a foundational piece on understanding systems transformation better. The systems transformation is one of those key sustainability buzzwords. If you're a fan of sustainability bingo and you sit through these events and try and tick off all of these different terms that are coming out, systems transformation will be top of the list. But do we really understand what systems transformation means? Do we understand crucially what systems transformation means in the same way as each other? So that's something we set out to do quite early on in this process. Reviewing a wide range of literature that was out there, talking to a series of experts and our member companies to try and get a common understanding and vocabulary for the uncommon challenge of systems transformation. And that's been laid out in an issue brief that we published a few weeks ago called Unlocking Systems Transformation. And I invite you to have a look at that in more detail. So systems transformation, once we understood how generally systems transform, the theory behind it, we then turned to looking at what exactly needs to transform. What are the changes and the transitions that we need to see, and how should we be laying those out in our renewed Vision 2050? So rather than going on a sector by sector basis, we took the decision to look at the key services and needs that business helps people to realize within society. What are the key products that business provides into society that are crucial for 9+ billion people living well? And how should those needs be met in a way that keeps us within planetary boundaries? So we've identified these 9 different buckets of activity: energy, products and materials, mobility and transportation, living spaces, finance, connectivity, health and well-being, water and sanitation, and food, where we think we're covering pretty much all areas of business activity. And then in each of those areas, looking at the key transitions that need to happen, the actions that business need to take, and then doing some sort of cross-cutting work as well, looking at insight pieces that can help to stimulate actions across those different areas. And just a little preview, so this is still very much a work in progress, but for each of those pathway areas, we're highlighting key different elements that, with the help of our member companies, helping to expand on all of these. So we have a vision. This is a draft of the current health and well-being pathway. So we have an overarching vision of the highest attainable standard of health for well-being for everyone, and then some key buckets underneath that to highlight what we mean by that vision. Then there are a set of transitions, and these are expanded in much more detail in our full version, and then those are underpinned by a set of action areas for business. What are the key things that business has to do in the decade ahead in order to help realize that vision and the transitions that we've identified? So very much still a work in progress, but that gives you some flavor of the sorts of discussions that we're having and that our members are driving. The other key thing that we had to realize was that these transitions and actions that we need to take don't happen in a vacuum. Obviously, the world around us is changing very quickly, never more so than now. So we have to be aware of the operating environment over the next 10 years and how we should be responding to that. What sorts of changes, what sorts of developments will be acting as headwinds or tailwinds to our efforts to realize the transformations that we need. So we've also done a deep dive piece looking at key demographic, environmental, economic, technological, political, and cultural shifts that we think are pretty much baked in over the next decade and are likely to happen and are likely to potentially affect our efforts either positively or negatively. I won't go into too much detail here, but you can find all this information online and we can make the links available to you. To complement that, we've also looked at a series of wildcard disruptions that could also happen. Back in January, when we were concluding this work, the global pandemic was still something that could happen, and that's been proved unnervingly prescient. These are sort of large disruptive events that could happen, again, either affecting our efforts to realize our vision positively or negatively. Therefore, critical that we bear those in mind as we plan our response and our actions over the next decade and understand exactly how we should navigate these various potential disruptions whilst also keeping our vision on track. Then finally, also look at COVID-19 and how that's set to impact the next decade. Again, this is another issue brief that we put out in recent weeks, looking at how COVID interacts with existing demographics and political and social divides, whilst also pressing fast forward on existing trends. So again, understanding what the next 10 years hold for us. And in the same vein, we've also done a piece which will be published in the next few weeks, looking at emerging innovations. So not necessarily innovations that are most crucial to sustainability or achieving our vision, but innovations that are potentially shaping the landscape over the next decade. So looking at things that are in their pilot phase, in their introduction phase, in their growth phase, and in their maturity phase, how can these different technological, business model shift, or social innovations potentially affect our efforts and again, act as headwinds or tailwinds of what we're trying to achieve. And COVID-19 has also highlighted for us the importance of having some solid foundations to this work. Again, it's very good to focus on the transitions and the actions that are needed by business, but unless we have solid foundations, those actions are meaningless. So we really need long-term resilience. COVID-19 has highlighted the fragility of our systems. So how can we make sure that we are resilient businesses in the face of change and adaptable to emerging macro trends? And also the need for us to have this conversation around reinventing capitalism, which is gaining pace constantly. We need a strong capitalist model that ensures that it supports our vision. Does our current model do this? And how does it need to change in order for that to be the case? So two other areas that we're focusing on much more strongly now in the light of the pandemic. And all those things come together really to help us work towards our vision. So our theory of how transformation happens, those foundations for transformation of long-term resilience and reinventing capitalism, the pathways that need to transform happening against a backdrop which we have to understand in order to realize our transformation. So that in theory is how it all comes together in our final report, which we're planning to publish early next year. Just to give you some idea who is leading this work and who's driving these conversations, we have 40 member companies who are shaping the work with a great wealth of expertise across a wide range of different sectors and industries and geographies. And that is supported by a group of global thought leaders who are rigidly checking everything we do and offering great insights as well to help us to evolve this work and make sure that it encompasses a wide range of different perspectives and viewpoints. So that, in a nutshell, is what we're up to on the Vision 2050 work. Very happy to take questions later on in the call, but now I'll hand back to Filippo.
Thank you, James. Thank you for the quick yet comprehensive overview in terms of where we've come from and also what we want to set out in terms of the ambition for this agenda, really around transformation and with some of the baselines around resilience, capitalism, and the 9 transformations that we're looking at. So thank you so much for that. And basically transitioning without losing too much time and taking advantage of the presence of Karen James, CEO of our member company ERM and member also of the WBCSD Executive Committee. Karen, we're delighted to have you on the line, and I think you are on the line. I'm told you're on the line by WhatsApp, so I trust you're there. We are delighted, of course, to count on your guidance within the Executive Committee, and we're delighted also to count on the guidance of ERM and the ERM team overall as part of this Vision 2050 work, as James laid out. ERM very strongly engaged in this piece and also very engaged in particular around the resilience agenda. We've seen how we have positioned the resilience as a critical foundation for transformation and to really set out this critical reset that is needed for the decade ahead, let alone for the decades ahead. We thought it would be a good occasion to give you the floor to share your personal perspectives, your leadership insights around the implications, some key messages that you would like to share with this audience, and the linkages back to the Vision 2050 work. So Karen, I'm handing over to you, and you have the floor and the microphone, of course. Thank you for being with us.
Great, thank you, Filippo, and it's a real pleasure to have the time to speak to people today. And before I start, Filippo, thank you very much to you and for the team leading the Vision 2050 project. ERM, for those of you who don't know, is a global pure play sustainability and environmental advisory firm. We have about 5,500 people across the globe, and we're very proud of our membership of both the WBCSD and in particular, very proud to be an active member of the Vision 2050 project, as we see it's vital for business to chart a course for the next decade that is ambitious, clear, collaborative, and obviously also very action focused. As Filippo said, we've been involved in a number of ways in the WBCSD and this project. I'm serving on the steering committee of the COVID-19 task force, WBCSD, which is looking at how we shape business learnings and responses. As Filippo said, we've got an ERM team working closely with the Vision 2050 team on the issue brief on long-term resilience. I'll talk a little bit about that. And then Linda Nedgel, who is our Global Sustainability Director at ERM, has actually been seconded to the Vision 2050 team, lead on the regional engagement workstream, whilst also being involved in the resilience project. So very, very pleased to be supporting what I think is an incredibly important part of the WBCSD's work. So let me perhaps start by sharing a little bit about ERM and resilience and our approach over the last few months, I guess. I thought it's probably important to start in terms of a definition, because I think often we mean different things. Talk about, certainly at ERM, what we think about when we think about resilience is the ability of our organization to cope with different challenges and to and we've tried to use those learnings to inform our approach and ensure the business remains resilient in the face of this current challenge, which is clearly very significant and very unprecedented. Some of the basic principles that we've adopted through that process have, first of all, been focus on the health and safety and well-being of our employees. That's always been our first priority, and it continues and has remained our top priority and for this current crisis. Second of all, I think just acting early and decisively and trying to build in as much flexibility as possible. Again, you know, kind of waiting to see what's going to happen generally does not help in a situation like this. And we moved quite quickly, for example, to get everybody across the company in 47 different countries working from home very, very early on and pre-lockdown. Retain talent, taking advantage of furlough schemes where they're available to make sure we retain as much capability in the company as possible in anticipation of needing those people into the future. Focusing on our clients and their needs. And so, you know, our staff have been quite incredible in terms of staying engaged with clients, staying in touch with clients, trying to understand how their needs are shifting and making sure that they're still able to support them, notwithstanding the very changed circumstances. And then finally, and possibly, you know, after health and safety, most importantly, thinking about how we can work differently and change things for the better. This is obviously within the context of our overall purpose for ERM, which is shaping a sustainable future with the world's leading organizations, which very much frames our decisions and actions. So what this has meant for us is really a very simple but three-pronged approach. The first one is resilience, the second is rebound, and the third is reimagine. So in terms of resilience, that is about keeping our people safe and taking the measures to protect the business in the short term. From a rebound perspective, it's around responding to client and market needs as they emerge and also as they change, which they have done quite significantly through this period. And then finally, reimagine. The economy, the way we work, society, etc., is going to fundamentally change, has changed. And therefore, we need to use this opportunity to transform and also help our clients to do that as well. Some of the changes that we're looking at currently are around the concept and issue of social and human capital, including diversity, equality, inclusion, and how we can take stronger action and be more visible on this. Like others, we've also made a pretty big pivot in terms of using technology and, you know, sort of digital transformation to make sure that we can deliver our work virtually and remotely. And also, for example, with rethinking our office space and travel. We signed up to the SBTI, the Science-Based Targets Initiative, in 2019, and we're really using this crisis as an opportunity to think about how we're going to work going forward and manage our impact at the same time. I think we've proved to ourselves during this crisis that we do not need to travel in the same way that we were previously. And the conversation going on within our organization at the moment is, if we can't reduce our non-client related travel by 50%, coming out of this crisis, then we're probably not trying hard enough. So, lots of conversations around those things in terms of, really how can we set ourselves quite different objectives rather than just incremental. Communicating this approach with our leaders, our employees, and our other stakeholders is providing confidence, I think, in the fact that we want to take those actions. Our staff have had the opportunity to be very much engaged in that, and it is definitely sparking innovation and collaboration in quite different ways as we seek to respond to both client needs. I think it's also brought perhaps, a new sense of authenticity and inclusion. A crisis like this requires you to be incredibly transparent with your people because, you need to ensure that they understand both the reality of the situation and also have confidence and hope that things will improve as we go forward. And I've seen just tremendous support amongst the ERM staff members for each other and also for our clients, which I think really draws on some of the core values that we have in the organization. So there's probably a few things that we've learned a bit about resilience, both, I guess, from the ERM experience, but in particular, the research that the ERM team is doing with the WBCSD Vision 2050 team. The research is only midway through in terms of building up the background to the issue brief on long-term resilience. So I can share some initial perspectives, but obviously we've got quite a bit more work to do. So the first thing I would say is that the language of resilience seems relatively new to business, even though we're hearing a lot about that now. I think pre-COVID, we heard terms like business continuity, we heard terms like crisis management, disaster recovery, and so on. And they tended to be used much more often, but they're not quite the same as resilience. In the research, we spoke to a lot of companies, and many of those that we had spoken to indicated that they had various forms of plans in place, but nobody was really completely prepared for both the scale and or the duration of the pandemic that COVID has presented. Most companies had done more planning in the area of supply chain, but given the length and the complexities of global supply chains and very much the just-in-time delivery model, many were caught out and are now thinking about the resilience of their supply chains in a new way, both short and long term, just in time versus just in case. I think the other aspect is we're also seeing a health crisis evolve into an economic and social crisis of quite unprecedented proportions. And business, I think, is scrambling to respond to some very complex issues that are playing out in very different ways across the world. And again, I think causing people to question what balance we have between short-term and long-term thinking. Alongside the COVID-19 challenges, we've obviously seen the demand on business to lead and respond in the discussion around inclusion as a result of the death of George Floyd in the US and the real upswell in the Black Lives Matter campaign. And I think the combination of all of these issues really requires businesses to be more resilient. And I think what that means is that leaders need to be much clearer about values and purpose, to be visible, to act decisively, and be a leader on some of these topics that perhaps might have otherwise been previously seen to be outside the remit of corporate CEOs. In terms of then thinking about how we link resilience to Vision 2050, I think the insights provided by the Vision 2050 project to date around systems transformation, macro trends and disruptions, and the required shift from shareholder to stakeholder capitalism are all important inputs to business leaders who are building plans for resilience within their business. And I think if this year has taught us anything, it is that uncertainty is the only certainty in the next decade. I think it shows how rapidly, on the positive side, we can make transformational changes when we need to. I don't think any of us could have predicted how quickly we could get the majority of our employees working from home on an ongoing basis, or conduct business without traveling, or hold conferences and forums completely online, whilst we're all juggling taking our children to school, Jonathan, dogs, doorbells, deliveries, and everything else that normally goes on in the background. Without preempting the report, the early recommendations are firstly for companies to be clear in their purpose and be sure that they consistently deliver on this in all that they do. To focus on their people, their well-being, their safety, their concerns, their ambitions. To engage with all of a company's stakeholders, to collaborate on shared interests, recognize interdependencies, and take a long-term perspective. And then finally, and this is something we're trying to do ourselves, is to challenge yourself. Don't go back to the old as we come out of this, but rather see it as an opportunity to transform to the new, because we have all been given, I think, a very rare and very precious opportunity to reset our businesses. Realizing Vision 2050, 9 billion plus people living well within planetary boundaries, I think, will be the ultimate test of resilience. Thank you, Filippo. Thank you for the opportunity. Back to you.
Karen, greatly appreciated the insights. A lot of rich content, and I liked your quote about uncertainty is the only certainty in the years ahead, in the decade ahead, and certainly something that is shaping a lot of our work. How do we sort of channel the thinking in a very uncertain period of time, but also probably an exciting period of time to actually think a little bit better about the long-term implications of some decisions today. I think some of the early commentary on Vision 2050 was, 2050 seems so far away, 2030, you're breaking it down to the decade ahead, but it's still far away. And actually now we realize that some of that thinking really shapes resilience, shapes supply chain, shapes the people within companies. So very interesting to be able to work on this right now in this phase of uncertainty and try to shape at least the direction of travel for business within that wider sphere. Karen, there is maybe here, yes, one question from Rob Cameron from Nestle to everyone, whether Karen, just give me a second. Can Karen comment on give me a second here, I'm multitasking and that's not my strengths. Could you, Karen, comment on the rules of the game? TCFD is going to be more important. What else do you see coming that could help drive progress in terms of rules of the game? Karen, from Rob Cameron at Nestle to you.
Hey Rob, good morning. Nice to hear your virtual voice anyway.
Morning, Karen. I just felt somebody ought to put something thoughtful in to give you something to respond to. And I know this TCFD, I know is important to you, and there may be other things that you can see coming because the things you outlined there, purpose and focus on people and stakeholders and chat, all these are absolutely I agree with, but I think that something's not going to work for us if we don't see the landscape change in terms of the rules of the game that we're all playing to. Anyway, yeah, maybe you've got a reflection on that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting comment, Rob, and I guess to some extent, I see that there are companies out there that don't need TCFD in order to do the right thing, and we've got a number of them, on our panel today, where we've got corporations who really are leading in this regard. But there's no question that there are also laggards, if you like, and therefore we need to have some form of either incentive or stick, if you like, to encourage those people or force, those people to do the right thing. I think TCFD is interesting because actually it has gotten real traction in a relatively short period of time. And as you know, it is being made mandatory in a number of jurisdictions. I actually think TCFD may end up being the model that sort of gets adopted for a broader range of topics. And I suspect, if I had a crystal ball and I was, and I was really good at reading it, I wonder whether or not a TCFD-like arrangement that deals with nature and biodiversity loss might be the next thing that comes along. You know, similarly, I think that the topics around human rights and diversity and inclusion, I think, are really going to jump up the agenda in a pretty material way. And I suspect we may see, you know, quite a lot of increased intensity around those. But I think TCFD actually forms quite an interesting model, and it's gotten traction very quickly and adoption very quickly, certainly within the financial sector. And I wonder whether that might actually just sort of get broadened into, you know, different topics. And you know, that having a model that people understand and can follow may well be quite interesting.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm afraid we need to move to the panel. You know how these online meetings go. They have to sort of go from one to the next. I see no other questions coming through, but I really thank you again on behalf of the team for your leadership within the steering committee for COVID-19, within the executive committee, and of course for all the leadership you provide to ERM and the team, including then the work that channels through the Vision 2050 work. So looking forward to continued engagement with you, Karen, and wishing you a good day. And thanks again for being with us this morning. Let's transition then directly into a panel led by Emma Cox of PwC. Delighted to have you on the line. Emma, you will be walking us through 45 or so minutes of a panel discussion with three of our member representatives, Karen Wesley of Shell, Marina Prada of Syngenta, and Jonathan Gill of Unilever. Very warm welcome also to them. Emma, handing over directly to you for the insights from the business perspective here on Vision 2050 and some of these long-term outlooks, how they are being shaped. Emma, over to you.
Thank you very much, Filippo, and good morning to everybody on the line. As Filippo says, we're going to spend about 45 minutes having, I am sure, a very engaging and insightful discussion with my three fabulous panel members. We will then have about 10 minutes, hopefully, for some Q&A. So if you have questions as we're going along, please do put them in the chat or store them up to ask at the end, and we will endeavour to get through as many of them as we can. As Filippo said, Vision 2050 has been an incredible process to be part of, and at PwC we've been very proud to be part of it as well. There's been a lot of engagement and sharing of key learnings and insights and exploring of big challenges and ideas, and I'm sure we're going to hear some interesting insights from Karen at Shell, Marina at Syngenta, and Jonathan at Unilever. I'd like to start, Karen, please, by turning to you. Going back a little bit in time to say, explore a little bit, why did you want Shell to get engaged and be part of the leading group of companies involved in refreshing Vision 2050? Could you spend a little bit of time maybe just sharing a bit of that background, but also what value you've got from it so far, and how has that changed, and is it continuing to change? So Karen, over to you.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me all right?
We can, Karen, that's great, lovely, thank you.
Super. Well, Shell has been a really long-standing and active member of the WBCSD, so we certainly wanted to continue, and in terms of goodwill, provide us a comment into the process, primarily because we certainly agreed that after 10 years an update was appropriate, because whilst the energy transition is underway, many of us feel that the way the world is moving is not necessarily on track to meet the 1.5 Paris Agreement. And the transformation of the energy system is going to rely on confluence of many solutions, and also involves a lot of different players, particularly from the demand side, across the value chains, and of course from the supply side, and indeed requires significant action from government. So by engaging with such a wide cross-section of business, we really feel that that's a key piece to ensure that that energy transition continues in the right direction, because we actually do feel that there's quite a lack of understanding and sense of realism around the scale and structure of the change. And this is just one of 9 transformations, right, that we're looking at in Vision 2050. So we really are keen to both gain a better understanding ourselves, but also work with others to gain a better understanding of what it really means to transform the energy system, given how significant that change really is for society. So I think that's really why. But as I said, we did feel that the last vision was useful, but needed to be updated. And we felt that this was really a time to raise the volume on the discussion around transformation of the system that we are very much a part of, which is the energy system, in order to meet the Paris aspiration, at least to keep us going at the right pace.
Super. And have you found that it's changed compared to what you expected it would be? Have you now got a focus not only on energy, but across those other 8 other work streams?
Yes, exactly. I think that's definitely the key point, in that the energy system is part and parcel of so many other systems, the built environment, all kinds of different industries. So really understanding those interconnections. And I think Karen also mentioned really understanding the interconnected world. And then of course, COVID coming along through right in the middle of this process really reminds us of how unprepared many businesses and governments are for dealing with these types of shocks. The need to build resilience in early on and to learn very much from what others are going through to do that. So being a part of the work stream was very educational from the get-go in terms of the integration and understanding the views of many different actors across the different systems, but then through this COVID situation even more so, in the sense that it really highlighted to some extent the vulnerability in the different systems, but also really highlighted how quickly actions can be taken with such a crisis. So seeing how quickly some governments were able to respond, how quickly companies, as Karen described, responded in terms of having people work from home, or quickly reorganizing their supply chains around key value elements. All of these things indicate how fast we can change and how fast the world could change if the crisis of climate change was fully recognized across all the value chains that we're active in.
Thank you, Karen. And I love that note of both combined optimism with action. And I think that level of change that we've shown ourselves capable of is going to be really necessary to overcome the challenges on the road ahead. So I'd like to turn maybe, Marina, to you and to your thoughts from a Syngenta perspective, maybe picking up a little bit on that issue of challenge and how we're learning to address those challenges. What would you say has been the most challenging element so far of revisiting Vision 2050? And have there been bits of looking at that have really surprised you?
Thank you, Emma. Syngenta has been was involved in the first version of Vision 2050, and this was the main reason why we wanted to participate on the refresh. And we see some of the same challenges. Karen preambled it a bit about the systems and the complexity of many systems and all the interconnectivity of the systems. We're talking about many variables, from the different pathways to the global realities versus the local realities, to the different potential futures and operating landscapes, to the different levels of ambitions that different companies have for the Vision 2050, as well as how we balance a vision for global multinationals, but also that will bring along the small and medium enterprises with us. And how do we balance as well the developing world versus the developed world. So these are all these complexities that make, I think, putting a vision in a document, as James was describing, very complex. And I remember in one of the sessions, I think it was in September, somebody said, well, complex is not the same as complicated. So we need to put something complex in a simple way where we all business can go together towards achieving that vision. And I think that was one of the, if you ask about the learnings of the process, I think was one of the interesting things, how all these 40 companies, or when maybe at the beginning weren't 40, but as we went through the journey, we got to 40 companies, are all working together and sharing all their knowledge, putting their business agenda on the side, but their knowledge into the project to make sure that what we put into this document makes us all help all together in one big chunk of business pathway towards achieving the Vision 2050. So I think you have these challenges, but it was impressive how all these companies work together to try to get to this document that will help all business, bring us all together towards this agenda of Vision 2050.
Thank you, Marina. And that collaborative approach, I think, is always one of the big strengths of WBCSD. I think many of us missed getting together in Montreux this year, where you get that real in-person learning together. But actually, these sessions that we're having here and the way that we've been working on Vision 2050 has shown that collaboration can still happen on an online basis. And I love the phrase that complex is not the same as complicated, and bringing the power of simplicity to our solutions. Moving on, maybe Jonathan, to you to pick up on some of the complex challenges that we're facing with COVID-19. Clearly that came in the middle of looking at Vision 2050. How have we had to adapt and change the approach to Vision 2050? And from your perspective, how is Unilever shifting its priorities in order to deal with that, and how has that become more important with this global crisis?
Thanks, Emma. I think from starting off with the Unilever perspective, and then I'll come to the WBCSD or my perspective of how WBCSD have shifted. I think first off, I think there's a need to look long term, but we also need to keep the focus on the short term. You know, we're a long way to from the end of this pandemic, and there's going to be a lot more ups and downs as we go. From a Unilever perspective, as an organisation, you know, obviously there's been human tragedies across the world, and specifically within our company. But as an organisation, we've been really impressed by the kind of the auto response of employees to do the right thing, in terms of helping where needs be, and focusing their support where needed. But also a massive increase in speed and agility. It's kind of been one of the greatest change management programs ever instilled in the business. So in some ways there's been some positive impacts of what's happened in terms of how we've learned about what we can do. But to the sort of bigger question around kind of the sustainability side of things, you know, there's a couple of things that draw some global lessons out. First is that, you know, it's clear as day to everyone that business is a critical part of our collective safety net, whether that's PPE, whether it's food, whether it's soap, you know, whether it's the building of extra ventilators. The second thing is that global cooperation is really not where it should be. You know, if you compare the 2008 response to the financial crisis to today, you know, you see just, you know, night and day. But on a positive then, you know, global supply chains worked, you know, throughout the pandemic. Yes, there were challenges. Yes, there was people working night and day to keep it going, but they worked. And, you know, the message about keeping borders open for goods, you know, appears to be being heard, fingers crossed. But also more broadly, there's a lack of resilience in kind of in many different systems and organisations. And also we've kind of been valuing things massively incorrectly. You know, we all see who actually are the kind of key workers in an organisation, in a country or an organisation, you know, those people who have to be in certain places. And lastly, really interestingly, you know, there's also been some very clear messaging on the performance of companies that are embedding sustainability into their business. So BlackRock released quite a lot of data analysis basically saying that sustainable companies have been outperforming those who are less sustainable. There's a huge increase in inflows into those high-performing ESG companies. So, you know, people are recognizing actually the need for that long-term resilience and the value that companies that embed sustainability into their operations have. But kind of on the bigger picture, Unilever opportunity for in terms of its impact on sustainability. You know, we all know the kind of the build back better, the respond, recover, reinvent, whatever it's going to be. You know, there's lots of different framings of it, but there's an opportunity here really to recognise these lessons that we've learned over the last few months, and actually embed them into the way we do business, but also actually, you know, shift the wider kind of view of business. And for Unilever, we see a big opportunity around the shift towards a more stakeholder-led capitalism. One that is not led purely in the service of financials, but actually seeks to serve the multiple stakeholders that we have, from people to people in a supply chain, to managing the financials, to managing the communities, working with suppliers, etc., etc. And at the core of that, you need to really tackle climate and protect the environment. You know, you need to embed climate action to everything we do, which is, you know, one of the reasons why we forged ahead with our announcements a couple of weeks ago on our increased ambition and actions on climate. But also we really need to tackle inequality. You know, you can't, it's clear as day that the huge challenges that we all face. And we've seen this evolve through the WBCSD project. So Filippo, Peter, Julian, James, you know, we've been talking to them quite intensively over the last few weeks, and including Alan, our CEO, about how we can really accelerate the Vision project, or certain elements of it, to really get things out there that governments can respond to about how they use their economic stimulus packages to really drive the shifts that we need to see. You know, this is an opportunity we have. Governments are coming to big business and saying, what do you think that we should be prioritising? What's your perspective on this? And actually, if we have a united view on driving this change, then there's a big opportunity to be able to do that. Some of that will be coming as part of the wider project, but some of it, I know Julian's working hard on to get out a little bit sooner. So for us, there's a huge opportunity to drive that more substantial change.
Thank you, Jonathan. And that's covered a very wide range of ideas. Thank you for sharing the Unilever perspective and also how that's fed into changes within the Vision 2050 focus and priority. Quite like to bring Marina and Karen in as well, just to comment on anything that they heard in relation to that and how it also has affected priorities within your own companies. Maybe Marina first and then picking up with Karen.
Yes, I guess COVID-19 happened exactly at the moment where we wanted to launch our new Good Growth Plan, which is our new sustainability targets. So we kind of stopped it because it wasn't the right moment to do so, and gave us a bit of time to think a bit more about it. And with the learnings from COVID, and at the same time, Vision 2050 also progressed a bit more, gave us a bit of time to think and I guess see if we're making the right assumptions. And it clearly became, we realized that the importance of, we are in agriculture, we work in a business that works with agriculture, the importance of food and food security and sustainable agriculture, and the importance of innovating to make sure, I guess, we rebuild better, as Jonathan said. So this help us take the time to think about it and what the implications are about having a resilient company in the future. So finally, last week, we announced our new Good Growth Plan. So it was an important moment that made us think about it, as I think all companies are thinking about how to make their companies more resilient, between what we talked about before about TCFD, what we talk about the future of capitalism, the work that has been done in December or is still ongoing with the Vision 2050 project, as well the mega trends. All this information is very vital for companies to be able to figure out as much as they can in the future to come.
Yeah, and what's interesting there is that you paused, but you didn't stop. You paused to reflect and absorb the information and just reshape and rechart the way, but continue to move forward. And I think one of the things that's impressed me is the number of companies during this pandemic that have continued to make very big, bold commitments against the backdrop of a lot of uncertainty and change. So it's great to see Syngenta also doing that, but harnessing it within the thinking of Vision 2050 as well. Karen, maybe turning then to Shell, who've also continued to forge ahead in terms of commitments and change that you're facing. Would you like to pick up on a couple of those and maybe tie it in with how Vision 2050 has helped influence that thinking and your future ambitions?
Yes, thanks. Well, those of you who've been watching the media will have seen that shortly after the COVID pandemic broke and began to have such significant impacts on the markets and demand for oil products, combined then with the rapid decline in the oil price due to the OPEC situation, we did announce that we would be reducing our dividend by 66%, which was seen by the markets as a brave but also realistic move. At the same time, we continued to support and then increased our commitment and our aspiration to reach net zero carbon by 2050. So that was quite an interesting convergence of events, and I think very timely in the sense that we have an opportunity now, as was mentioned by all the other participants, to see what changes will come from society now that that headwind of business as usual is beginning to die down. So now that governments and consumers and companies are saying, you know, there needs to be a new direction, what will that be? But also governments more willing to take more radical action. So I think there's a convergence of contextual factors as well as two bold moves by the company that give us an opportunity to do a significant reshape of not only Shell, but also working with partners to reshape the industry. We know, for example, that if we are to reach the Paris aspiration, we'll need a significant ramp up in CCS as well as nature-based solutions based on forests. Both of those will require extensive collaboration with parties that aren't necessarily our usual partners. Of course, agriculture, forestry, but also heavy industry, those are in the harder to abate sectors. So I think the wind of change here is really an opportunity to do much more significant and impactful collaboration, recognizing that the status quo that we had pre-COVID is neither going to continue nor is desired to continue. And we've heard enough from consumers and from society that that headwind has died down and we're ready for a change. So really looking forward to seeing how collaboration through Vision 2050 increases and basically accelerates work in those new value chains, things like hydrogen. I mentioned CCS, also natural climate solutions, but also in new products and innovative solutions to lower carbon products in the future. So I think there's a lot to play for, but it's definitely going to be a different Shell's going to be a different company when Vision 2050 is achieved than it is today. And the collaboration that we gain from the work with Vision 2050 will be key to our success.
And Karen, in terms of those collaborations that you're talking about, what are the different sorts of skills and mindset that a company like Shell has got to adopt to work in those different ways? And are there any kind of hints and tips that you can give to others as they're looking at different collaborations?
Well, some of the things that we're working on a lot at the moment, and I'm head of the environment part of Shell, so you can think about the environmental impacts of our conventional business that seriously need to be managed, of course, and those are really table stakes. But going forward, as consumers will be looking for not only lower carbon products, but products with an overall lower environmental footprint, life cycle analysis that is broader than the usual carbon, greenhouse gas footprinting, looking at how you can use recycled plastics as feedstock for our existing businesses such as chemicals. All of those are areas in which our skills need to develop and grow. Also, more use of digitalization to both monitor and measure environmental performance, having more live scorecards so we can be much more in tune with what our performance is. But I think the future really is going to be driven more by consumption of products with a lower footprint and focusing on developing those products in line with what society is asking for. And that's where collaborative work is so important, because if you're only looking at it from your perspective or only working within your industry, you're not seeing all those trends and adapting as you go along, whereas tuning into very different companies and very different consumer mindsets gives you that opportunity to be more innovative and look for those opportunities. From my perspective, it's really being focused on the lower environmental footprint on all different aspects. I think currently many oil and gas companies are focused on greenhouse gas, but going forward, I think consumers are going to be asking about different areas of supply chain, water footprint, recyclability, where the feedstock comes from. All of those aspects, I think, are areas in which we will need to grow our skill set into the future.
Those are fascinating insights, Carolyn. I think will resonate with lots of people on the call. Marina, maybe turning back to you and back to Vision 2050 and kind of the hopes and aspirations and what makes it an exciting project. How would you and Syngenta think that you're going to be able to use and implement the types of output that Vision 2050 is aiming for? What will it bring for you?
I think, as a bit of what I mentioned before, and Karen also mentioned, I think it will provide business like a common agenda for action over the next decade. And I think combined with our good growth plan that we believe is our contribution to achieving that vision clearly in our sphere of influence, this will help us also be able to talk to the different actors and collaborate. So that's why I was mentioning what Karen was saying. I think collaboration is very important, and this is what we have learned from the previous good growth plan, that we cannot do it alone. No, a company cannot do it alone, and also not business can do it alone. We need to collaborate with other ones. For example, we are now collaborating with the Nature Conservancy, and they are looking at our R&D process and an innovation process to see how we can develop products that are more in line with what are the expectations of the stakeholders. So I think collaboration is an important aspect, and I think the Vision 2050 opens this opportunity to dialogue with other stakeholders that not might be the ones that usually one think about as a business. And I also think that the Vision 2050 has already influenced also internally. I was not the only person participating in the project, and we brought people from strategy, from risk, from R&D as part of the work. And I think already that conversation has made changes inside of the company in areas that are not the traditional sustainability folks. So I think it's an exciting project that it will help companies move ahead.
That's really good. That's really good to hear. Thank you, Marina. Jonathan, maybe turning to you and to Unilever, you've talked quite a bit about it already, but Unilever's been a leading force in many areas of sustainability for a long time. What was it though about Vision 2050 that made it interesting and valuable, personally to Alan Jope, your CEO, and the wider executive team that's made it a focus and a priority? Is it the collaborative side? Is it the speed of change and need for action? Or what is it that brings it to be so important to you?
So I think the overarchingly, when the first Vision project was done, we were involved, and there was a reflection that a lot has changed in the 10 years, but actually things have changed in a slightly different direction to maybe when from the original Vision project. And so it was kind of an update made total practical sense, So first on that. I think secondly, the industry, the multi-industry sort of business-wide approach, you're not just looking at it from a consumer goods lens, or you're not looking at it just from a energy sector, you're looking at it from the different perspectives, and as it evolved into the new pathways, where actually it's less about kind of an individual industry and more about actually what are the key elements that cut across them. I think that's made a huge amount of sense to us, because as a company, we're a consumer goods company that doesn't sit in any one nice place. We do personal goods, we do home goods, and we do food. So we fall out of many of the industry brackets. So that's the things. And then I think, but one of the most important things, and I think WBCSD made this clear from the off, is the sort of trying to simplify and make practical the systems change that was needed. Because, you know, we all, on these calls, we all talk about systems and stuff. They're very hard to kind of really pin down what we mean by that without huge maps that take half an hour to kind of really understand. And so finding that kind of those key levers to drive the change and kind of make it happen, I think was really important for us. And then as the process has gone on, I think, you know, there's been an increased engagement and from Alan, but I think that's kind of aligned also with his kind of getting on board as CEO and things like this, and kind of engagement in the kind of the wider, the bigger pictures of issues outside of the business. And then with you know, and last year we saw a huge focus on, you know, there was a ramping up of discussions around, you know, the future of capitalism and what actually is the shift we've made that's needed. And then that's continued even further and is rightfully kind of quite high on the agenda, at least in the sort of the knitting circle that we sit in, to how to drive that. And again, Vision's been doing that work. So kind of it all has, you know, when you're looking at a project that's called Vision 2050, you sometimes think, well, actually, how do you know if it's going to be right? But actually, you know, Vision has got a couple of things right already, you know, so which has been quite positive to see.
So Jonathan, I love the idea of Unilever's knitting circle. I think that's a new one for us. Is there anything that's come out of it that's so far that's really surprised you, or that's made you stop and think and say, actually, we need to build that into Unilever's thinking, or a shift in direction?
You put me on the spot there. I can't pick out one specific aspect. I mean, to be honest, there's different people involved in each of the different work streams. I think the one thing that's impacted me the most is the work that they've done on the stakeholder capitalism side of things, which basically, you know, I think there was a large proportion of the group involved in Vision, kind of sort of saying this needs to be a key part of it. It needs to be kind of a fundamental pillar. And Vision heard the Vision team, recognised that and listened to it. And I think it's the work they've done there has been really helpful to us in terms of our views on what that should look like, that we've been kind of using externally and pushing with governments and other stakeholders about what that looks like. Because for us, there's three fundamentals. There's basically environmental action, there's tackling inequality, and there's the shift to stakeholder capitalism, which are really needed. And that third one, you know, Vision's been very valuable in helping us pull that together.
Brilliant. And it is interesting, those three, and I've heard Alan talk about those three as well, environment, inequality, and then stakeholder capitalism. And the joining of stakeholder capitalism into how does it influence the others, I think is a newer narrative that is really becoming quite powerful. Karen, maybe picking up with you on that theme, have you also thought that Vision 2050 will help you engage with a wider or different body of stakeholders and given you some different ideas as to how to do that? I mean, you're an industry in a big transition phase and needing, as you said, to engage on different agendas. How do you see Vision 2050 helping here?
Well, one of the elements of Vision 2050 that I really appreciated and we supported strongly was the regional engagements, because what's been very, very clear through the COVID pandemic is that, you know, where some governments were fairly slow to take action, others have been, you know, very fast, but also in terms of any kind of recovery, some are working to build back stronger, introducing more ESG into their build back investments, etc., where others are just desperately trying to recover. So considering how this changes from region to region, I find very important, and I think the regional engagements from WBCSD are ones I've been watching very closely. You know, one clear influence for us, and in not just the Vision 2050, but overall with WBCSD, is the influence around SDGs. So really internalizing these goals within our company. You know, it's just been in the last year that IPECA, one of our industry association, has really looked at the mapping of the oil and gas sector against the SDGs. We also launched a website just this year with our sustainability report, looking at all the SDGs and how Shell engages on those. So that's one that's come through WBCSD generally, and the strong action from many other members around the Sustainable Development Goals. So I think for me, it's the regional aspect, really understanding how different regions are taking action around the recovery, but also understanding the impact on the overall SDG landscape and continue to engage on that. But really, I mean, fundamentally, I think my perspective, it's the role of WBCSD in broadcasting the commitment, explaining the role of government in business and meeting the global challenges, because we've seen how difficult it's been to see the national contributions embrace the Paris goals. We've seen how difficult it is to see governments taking, in some cases, significant action. And so for me, the really important element of WBCSD is broadcasting the voice of business, broadcasting the role of business, and bringing business together around real coordinated global action on the SDGs and now on the recovery plans, and to come back as a stronger community and society. So that, I think, is where WBCSD is really uniquely placed to represent business and also to bring us all together around some really common principles and objectives.
Fantastic. That's a really nice actual summary, and probably there's a couple more things I would like to ask you all, but actually it is, and Filippo has just put it on the chat, it's a good time to pause and think whether there are some questions that you would like me to put to the panel on your behalf. So do please start to write those questions in chat, or raise your hand and start to intervene on any of the topics that we may not have covered with our wonderful panel.
Nothing so far, Emma.
Okay.
I will keep monitoring and let you know.
Thank you, Filippo. And this is really to all of you. One of the things Karen just said is that actually this sharing and the raising of ambition by business is really important, and a way of actually convening at bigger scale and bringing a sort of more united voice together. But there may be a lot of people on the call at the moment who are thinking about how do they approach their boards, how do they challenge if they want to up their game in relation to their sustainability strategies. Have you got any particular advice to people who are doing that about what the best way is of going about that raising of ambition? And maybe Marina, start with you, and then I'll pick up on what's coming in and on the chat. What advice would you give to others?
Sure. I recall when the first Vision 2050 was launched in 2010, and that piece of work really helped internally to push the agenda and push the envelope to launch our previous sustainability plan. So I would encourage companies to use this opportunity to do that, because it's not like suddenly the company is deciding what to do in isolation. It is 200 companies behind the World Business Council supporting this Vision 2050, and it's a common agenda. So it is not a strategy that is in isolation. I think this is important for leadership to understand, and this will help define internally what is the contribution of each of these individual companies to this bigger picture, a bigger agenda.
Indeed. Jonathan, do you want to pick up and give a little bit of advice or any key thoughts that you have?
Yeah, sure. There's just start off with kind of some things we've been sort of recognizing in the recent sort of COVID context that has reaffirmed our commitment to this, and then I'll come back to the kind of the internal salesy part. But one is there's very clearly an intolerance from young people around kind of who are ignoring the issues around climate, inequality, and you know, there's very much recognition that these people want action to take place. So if you're a business and you're ignoring this, then you're going to struggle to get the right talent into your business. I think you know, there's a lot of research that Edelman have done on this, so which they've made publicly available. I think there's something like, you know, something like 60% of consumers are basically sort of judging companies on how they act in the response to COVID. And I think there's some notable British companies who may not do well out of that. There's also a big recognition that sort of a warning's not heeded. You know, we all hear about kind of big macro issues that kind of are coming ahead of us, and there's a sort of sense they're so big and scary that you're not quite sure what to do. But actually, on the sort of pandemic side of things, it's made it very real. You know, about actually, this has been forecasted for years, and actually there's been very little done to prepare for it. And the other piece on this is, which I think really supports the work of Vision, is that there's a really clear picture of kind of the interconnectedness across the planet. You know, we all rely on each other greatly within and across borders. You know, so it's you know, clear as day, you know, basically of this issue. But then also, you know, you've got these kind of things that kind of support you to kind of make this change, but you've got to recognize the challenges, and I mentioned some of these earlier, but there's a big capacity issue. You know, COVID is requiring kind of, you know, more than the full attention of governments, of businesses around the world. You know, are the bigger but less urgent sort of challenges kind of being put to the bottom of the list? You know, it's a big worry. How do you create that capacity to tackle them both? You know, there's the oil price has been talked about, and you know, there's a worry there that actually it's easy to get back on your feet if you roll back against some of your commitments around, say, renewable energy or plastics, and you know, and go back to oil. So, you know, how do we tackle that? And you know, that's from a buyer, you know, as a supplier within, as a you know, as the business, Shell, I'm sure, must be grappling with that, given the challenges that they have as well. And then also the bigger picture around kind of, you know, we see the interconnectedness, you know, that's happening, but actually governments are kind of staying kind of, you know, in their sort of nationalist kind of silos by the great degree. So you've got this kind of melting pot stuff that's going on. And from a business, should all be pretty obvious. You know, you can see this, and you should be you'd like to think that it'd be able to respond to this and drive change. But from a kind of selling in perspective, to kind of get people on board, I think the vision work is, you know, because it's so comprehensive and because of the quality of it, you know, it will be supportive, as Marina mentioned from the 2010 example. But also I think there's a really good opportunity to actually get organizations to really reflect on think about them from a resilience perspective. And I know WBCSD will be talking more about resilience in the project, because actually, even as then that's a purely selfish perspective. You know, how resilient are you as an organization? And when you look at it from you know, the wider kind of environment you operate in, you'll soon come across all the issues that we talk about every day, and you'll be thinking, oh, okay, I'm reliant on that. You know, this is concerning, and you start kind of building that sort of investigative mindset, and hopefully leads to a focus on how you solve those problems, or how you manage, you know, in a positive way, rather than sort of burying head in the sand or anything like that.
I think that's great advice, and I think a lot of people will take that away and use that resilience argument to broaden their conversations. Karen, I'd like to pass back to you and maybe combine both any advice that you give with the first of the questions that came up on chat, because you were talking about the importance of SDGs. So Filipe Perez de Almeida said, what is your biggest challenge on operationalizing an SDG aligned strategy for your companies? So maybe bringing that sort of advice and SDGs together in an answer, if that's possible.
Thank you. Yeah, because you gave me the perfect question to both build on Jonathan's good comments and also conclude with my hopes for the Vision 2050. What I think the world needs at the moment is to really stress coordinated global action. I think the culture of business working that way, and the behavior around collaboration and creating a global platform for discussion, will hopefully counterbalance some of the more negative aspects of nationalism. So to me, the opportunity for business to work on a global platform in a coordinated way with transparency is, I think, something that's very hopeful for the world, and I'm really looking forward to being a part of that.
Thank you, Karen. couple of questions here that are interesting. We haven't touched really in this on SMEs. Would anybody like to, from the panel, like to comment about how Vision 2050 can be used to engage with SMEs more effectively, given their huge role in the world's economy? Would anyone like to put their hand up to comment on that?
I'll go. I think it's probably one of the biggest challenges that's out there, not just for Vision, but also for kind of the broader sustainability agenda. I think organisations like ICC, International Chamber of Commerce, have got a big role to play. I think UN Global Compact and the kind of national bodies have got a role to play. But actually, I think this is one of the bigger challenges of how you take this conversation out of kind of the global multinationals into smaller businesses. And this, I think, is critical from a government kind of engagement perspective as well. So I don't have an answer, but I fully agree it's a big challenge.
I think it's a debate that we're going to have to continue to address, and actually it's a good challenge to put to all of us as bigger businesses, how when we look up and down our supply chains we can get more SMEs involved. Another of the questions, and we've probably just got time for one or two more comments before we close. Another of the questions was about many of the panelists were more focused on environment, climate, inequality, inclusion, diversity, and stakeholder capitalism, which, to be fair, is a very broad range of topics that we've covered. But there was an ask for any more specific comments on nature and biodiversity and where we may be heading there. We certainly touched on it at the beginning of the conversation, but it is a very important part of the conversation, and also for business generally getting more involved in nature and biodiversity, and businesses that have never been involved in it before. Maybe Marina, starting with you, and then anyone else who would like to comment. Do you see a bigger role for nature and biodiversity within your business and within Vision 2050?
Yes, well, clearly we work in agriculture, so nature and biodiversity and soil health has been part of what we try to contribute to for many years already, but we do see an increased awareness about the importance of it. Before maybe it was the farmer, but now it's a wider community about, I'm talking specifically about the area which is important for Syngenta, which is soil health and biodiversity on farmland. But I also see it in the Vision 2050, how it came up, how many times in how many pathways we have the word regenerative. So it is becoming a very important topic, and I think it is reflected in the work that's being done in Vision 2050.
And I wonder whether businesses that play naturally in this area like yours have a role to play more so to help other businesses understand how they can help and influence on it. And maybe it brings us back a little, Karen, to your comments around collaboration and the broadening out of agendas that you see yourself being involved in up and down the supply chain. Is that something you would comment on?
I was going in another direction on your question, which is that going forward from a perspective of new energies, really all energy will come from nature. So I was sort of going off onto that tangent. But, you know, if you think about wind, sun, and even biomass, in the future, instead of fossil energy, we really will be building most of our energy system on nature as it is at its finest, really. So that was where my mind was. I hope that's helpful.
Indeed it is. There's an interesting question here that was, what should the role of universities be? Which I think I'd broaden out into a wider one, which might be, what's the role of business in learning and teaching people more about these agendas? And do you within your companies think that is a role you need to play? Maybe Unilever, starting there, Jonathan, with you.
Yeah, so I think from more broadly from an education perspective, I think it's a big challenge around kind of matching the skills that people are people are being taught in all education settings versus the the 21st century skills that are going to be needed in the fourth industrial revolution. So I think there's a big challenge there, and something our chief of HR, Lena, is very sort of focused on. But then from the role of kind of business and kind of engaging people on these topics, then, you know, absolutely, I think we've all seen, you know, the explosion of purpose from brands in the last couple of years, and, you know, our CEO's ambition that all brands within Unilever have a purpose beyond the financial and beyond the sort of product's capability, but actually to do something beneficial for society or the environment. And I think as part of that, you know, you're not just sort of talking to the people who know about these things and care about this, but you're also raising agendas. And to be honest, the best example of that from a Unilever perspective is Ben & Jerry's, you know, and they've done it for years. And they've really kind of ramped up the noise around kind of climate justice, but also, you know, they've focused on other kind of pertinent issues around kind of refugee crisis and things like this in Europe, often in the face of kind of, you know, consumer sentiment that maybe wasn't particularly positive, but actually they've taken it on to try and sort of change that. So there's definitely an opportunity to do it. I think it's an important, you have to get the right balance for each of these things. But there's certainly, you know, the mass reach that brands have into people's lives. You know, I think we reach something like 2.5 billion people every day. They like use a product. Then there's a big opportunity to kind of raise awareness of issues and the problems, but also the solutions that business is taking, but also that consumers can take as well. But there's also just, you know, I don't think we should hang our hats too much on this capability, because, you know, to change behaviour is much different from raising awareness. You know, raising awareness is one thing, but then changing approaches is very different.
I think actually we're pretty much out of time there, but it's a good note to end on, which is, if you like, a call to action that Jonathan has raised, and how I think we've heard in the last 45-50 minutes some really fantastic ideas from how our panelists and their companies have engaged in these really complicated agendas and really raising ambition, but with a view to practical action and how to use Vision 2050 as part of the roadmap to success. It's been an optimistic chat full of really good ideas. So thank you from me to all of my super panelists, Karen Wesley, Marina Prada and Jonathan Gill. And I will hand back to Filippo to close us off with a couple of minutes to go.
Yes, thank you so much, Emma, and thank you so much to our panelists, our colleagues, panelists, fantastic insights, a lot of takeaways that we'll capture, by the way, in a short written summary alongside the recordings and the slides. So thank you so much for feeding into that. Thank you, Emma, for a great moderation and for teasing out also questions from the audience. I think what we have seen is really the idea of Vision as both a collaboration platform, but also very much as an engagement platform, an action-oriented platform, engagement in its shaping phase already. And I think to Karen's point around the regional engagement occasions that we have built already, over 24 of them in the last year alone, is really to try to bring everybody along in the business community, including in some of the smaller companies that are part of the WBCSD ecosystem, bring them along, trying to shape this vision together, of course, under the leadership of the 40 members that are driving it. So really very much the idea of dialogue, of engagement, of criticism, of constructive criticism, but also of optimism, very much at the core of WBCSD's ambition. Very much also at the core of the ambition with this slide you see is to break a long, over 18 months project into smaller parts that deliver value to our members now, that deliver value to a wider debate that has become increasingly urgent, even more so through the COVID-19 crisis. So how do we break it down so as to deliver outputs and value to the business community all along the way? And you can find a number of resources there that have already been shaped and produced. There's a number of them coming your way soon, so watch this space for a piece on the key innovations that James Gaume alluded to. Watch this space for a piece on resilience that was alluded to by Karen James. And as Jonathan Gill alluded to, also the piece on stakeholder capitalism being shaped now together with the members. So plenty of information coming your way throughout the next 8 to 12 weeks. And as we shape the 9 transformations, the 9 pathways further, all of that will also be, of course, consolidated. So really an invitation to watch this space via the web link that you see below. And of course, in closing, just in time on Swiss time at the bottom of the hour, a great thank you to all of you. Thank you on behalf of the WBCSD team to you in the membership, in the speaker slots that you have kindly filled to really share openly work that is being shaped. So we're really work in progress, and very important for us to be able to communicate about it and to bring and to rally other companies along the way, and to really put that leadership agenda front and center also in 2020 in these turbulent times. So thank you very much on behalf of the team to the speakers. Thank you very much, of course, also to all the team members who made this happen, including the Vision 2050 team, but also the events team, the IT team, and many others who are engaged, as you see here, in a wider series of events. This dialogue was part of a series of events and is part of a series of events that we're shaping throughout the past few months and going further down the second half of the year. So please watch this space for more announcement of interesting events. There is another session happening later today, a repeat of this session today, but with different speakers. We'll have representatives of Acciona, Chanel, Fujitsu, and ERM share their own insights into this Vision 2050 process, and more events happening throughout the next few months. So please, if at any time you have any question or comment or suggestion, reach out anytime to the team. So with that said, I'm happy to wrap up this session. I'm happy for all the participation also through the chat. We're very appreciative of your support throughout the process, and I look forward to this continued engagement around vision and many other topics. Thank you so much to everybody, and I'm sort of waving, hope you can see it, and wishing you all a good day, morning, or evening. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, see you again soon.